This is the card we're going to make today. This is using a panel that was laminated using a stencil and Decofoil Transfer Gel and a stamp that I watercolored on some cheap watercolor paper. And let's begin. Alright, I'm going to use a JustRite With Sympathy stamp set for this rose right here. And I'm also going to use some really cheap watercolor paper that I got from the Dollar Tree at one point. And so I'm going to use my stamping platform. And I am going to stamp onto this using archival black ink. This is ink that's good for watercolor. And since I used archival ink on this stamp, I want to make sure I get it cleaned right away. So I'm cleaning it on my chamois and using some Hero Arts Ultra Clean on my stamp scrubber to make sure I clean the stamp. And here's the stamped image, and I'm going to trim it down with my trimmer. And I'll use my heat gun to help dry it. And for this watercolor, I'm using some Kuretake Gansai watercolor set. It's a 36 watercolor set. And since I did the original panel a while ago, I'm trying to guess as best I can what colors I had used. And so the ones I've ended up using for this particular panel is number 37 and number 52. And when I'm watercoloring, I'm putting some clear water down first, and then I put the color down, and I put the color down in the darker areas, and then I use clean water from the brush to pull the color out to the lighter areas of the flowers and the leaves. And I'm using a number 4 watercolor brush for all this. Now I'm going to use my heat tool to dry it. And since I used some pretty low quality watercolor paper, it warped quite a bit. And to help flatten it out, I sandwiched the panel in some folded copy paper and sent it several times through my die cutting machine using the normal thin metal die sandwich. And I also eventually used the metal shim to add additional pressure. Okay, and to create the panel, I'm using a stencil I have in my stash along with some Decofoil Transfer Gel, and I'm spraying temporary adhesive on the back of the stencil. And in this case, it was too strong an adhesive, and so that was probably a mistake. Then I'm using my craft knife to add the transfer gel and wiping it smooth and carefully removing the stencil, and I want to make sure that I go clean the stencil off right away. And so I'm going to let the panel completely dry, and now that it's dry, I'm going to put some Decofoil on it, and I'm sandwiching it in some parchment paper, and I'm going to use my Laminator. I used it on the setting of 3, but I probably should have used it at a setting of 5, and then I'm sending it through twice. And now for the reveal, and this is what it looks like. I'm trimming it down. And to remove some of the extra, I'm just using my craft knife to help remove it and to help smooth where the glue pulled away some of the paper. I'm using my electric eraser. I use the Lawn Fawn large stitched rectangles to cut out the foiled panel and some Paper Studio cardstock for the mat. And I've also matted the flower panel with the same Paper Studio that I'm using for the main mat. I'm using a card that's going to be 6.5 by 5 inches. And I'm taping some ribbon that I have in my stash on the foiled panel. And now I'm taping that onto the main mat. And I'm also going to use a small stitched rectangle to cut out some fun foam and glue that onto the flowered panel. And then glue that whole thing onto the foiled panel. And I'm gluing some Stampin' Up! Sequins onto the panel. And I tied a small piece of ribbon to make a bow. Okay, and I'm going to run a free program that is called Inkscape. And I'm going to use the text tool here to type in the text that I want to use. Now I want to use a font that is a single line font, so I have downloaded a free font from dafont.com, and you can find single line fonts under the handwritten category on Dafont. And so I am going to scroll up, and It's Always Forever is the font I'm going to use here. And so now we can look at this to see what it looks like, and that looks pretty good. So the next thing we've got to do is we've got to come to Path and Union. And then now we want to save it as an SVG file. So we want to come to File and Save As. And it defaults to Inkscape SVG. And you don't want that. You just want a plain SVG. And then we can call it what we want. And let's call this one Thank You SVG. And I'm saving it into a folder on my hard drive. Now we can close down Inkscape. Don't need to save it. And now I'm going to open my ScanNCut Canvas program. And I'm going to want to open an SVG file, so import from my computer, and I'm going to find the file that we just created in Inkscape. Okay. And we need to select it and go up to Layer and Unlock All so that we can move it out of the way. And we can zoom in to see what it looks like. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to come over to Edit, and I'm going to change the width to about 1.75 inches. Now I'm going to change this to a draw file, because we're going to want to use our pen on the ScanNCut to actually draw this. And then after we draw it, I'm going to want to cut out a tag for it. And so I'm going to come to Shapes here, and we'll zoom out a bit, and I'm going to find a shape that I can use for 1/2 of my tag, and I think this one right here will work. So I'll just resize this so that it fits 1/2 of my happy birthday. Then I'm going to duplicate this and I am going to flip it. And we'll put that on this side. And then I am going to scroll up here and just get a square. And we'll put this in the middle. Now I want to set it so that all three of these are the same height. So we'll come and we'll look at this first one and see what the height is. It's about 0.56. So I'm going to change all of them to 0.56 of the shapes that we just added. And then this is 0.56 also. And then I'm going to move them so that they overlap. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to move my text out of the way for the time being. And then I'll select all of these shapes, come back to Edit, and I want to align them in the middle so that they're all aligned, and then I want to weld them. And so now I have got the cut file that's going to cut out the tag, and I can bring my happy birthday in here, select them both, and then I want to align to the center and the middle. And I think that I want to move my happy birthday down a little bit. So I'm just going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to move this down just a little bit. And that's better. And now I will select them both, come up to Layer, and I want to group them. Now I want to make sure that the overall size of the group is no more than 2 inches, because that's the width that I wanted. So I'll just adjust that to 2 inches. And so now we're ready. So we've basically got our two shapes. This one is a draw file and this one is a cut file. And so I'm going to go ahead and I am going to transfer the FCM file via the internet. Now the warning that we're getting here for the tiny objects are automatically removed when converting the FCM file. Those are going to be the dots on the I and on the exclamation point. And now we'll go to the ScanNCut. I'm removing the protective sheet from my cutting mat and putting some vellum on the mat. I am also securing it down with some micropore tape. Okay, next I'm going to load my mat into my ScanNCut. And then I am going to retrieve data from the internet. And now I'm going to scan in the background. Okay, now you can't see the vellum very well, but I know I placed it at the 1 inch mark, 1 inch over and 1 inch down. Now we'll come to Edit, and I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to make sure that I'm within that range. And so about right there ought to be good. And I will click OK, OK, and OK again. Now the first thing I'm going to do is draw. And so I am going to change my cutting blade right here. So I just lift up the lever and take out the cutting blade. And I'm going to use my brother pen holder that came with my ScanNCut Dx. You just press the little button on the back to open it. And the black pen that came with my ScanNCut Dx. Take off the lid and just drop the pen in. And then I'll close the lid. And then with the brother logo facing out, I'm going to place it into the slot. and then close the lever. And then we're ready to start drawing. So we've got this set to draw, and I will click Start. Okay, now it tells me that my scanner level is in position 1, and it's telling me to move it to position 2. And so what they're talking about is the lever on this side is set to 1, and so I'm just going to lift it up to position 2. And then click OK, and then I'll click Start. Screen. And now we're going to cut. So we'll change this to cut. I'm going to change my lever over at the side here back to position 1. I'm going to take out my pen and open it by pushing the button on the back. Just lift out the pen, cap it, and now here is my auto cut blade with the Brother logo in the front. I'm just going to slide it into the slot here and push down the lever. And then I'll come back to my screen. It's set to cut, and I will click Start. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention, when you set it to cut, you want to, because in my case, I cut a lot of vinyl on this, and so a setting that I want to check, so I'm going to click on the wrench here, and I'm going to make sure that my half cut here is off. And so that's something I should have done before I cut, but I knew it was off because I had turned it off. But now we can check to see whether or not we got our cut. And so I'll use the spatula that came with my ScanNCut, and I'll remove the tape from the top here. And it looks like it cut okay. And so here it is. And the one other thing I want to do, because the dots of the eye and the exclamation point were too small, I'm going to go ahead and take my marker, the pen that I used, and just manually draw in those dots, just like that. And so we've got our vellum. We've got our vellum sentiment to put on our card. Okay, I'll use my multi-matte medium, and I'm just going to put some dots of glue behind the lettering. Then I'll put it maybe about right here. Okay, and to add some sparkle to that, I'm going to use some of my Wink of Stella. And here's the finished card, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye!